Did you guys know Israel had a secret program that gave money, weapons, material support, and medical aid to ISIS and Al-Qaeda? This is the story of Israel's Operation Good Neighbor. Operation Good Neighbor was a massive, semi-secret humanitarian initiative launched by the Israeli Defense Forces to provide extensive civilian and medical aid to Syrian citizens and rebel-controlled villages along the border. The program ran as a dedicated directorate from June 2016 until September of 2018, when the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad recaptured the southern border territory. However, the operation actually had its roots way back in 2013. This was when a severely wounded Syrian citizen approached the border fence in Golan Heights begging Israeli soldiers for medical help. Rather than turning him away, the local commander made an executive decision to let him cross for emergency treatment. This sparked a chain reaction, and by 2016, the IDF formalized the initiative under Northern Command to address the complete collapse of the medical and civil infrastructure in southwestern Syria. The IDF structured the operation into three distinct categories. The first was medical treatment, where over 4,000 to 5,000 Syrians were secretly brought into Israel for complex surgeries and care in northern hospitals. The IDF also established an internationally managed field hospital called Mazor Ladach directly at the Israeli military outpost near the border. To keep basic life support running in Syrian towns, the IDF transferred 450,000 liters of fuel to power water pumps, heating systems, and bakery ovens. They also crossed over heavy generators, water piping, and construction equipment to temporarily build schools. Now, these Syrian towns that they're talking about, these were all areas that were controlled by Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They also brought in massive shipments which were routinely passed through the borders at night, including 225 tons of food, 400 tons of flour, 12,000 packages of baby formula, 55 tons of winter clothing, and thousands of boxes of diapers. Again, they were giving this all to the Syrian moderate rebels, which happened to be ISIS and Al-Qaeda. While Israel ostensibly publicized it as a humanitarian mission, Operation Good Neighbor served highly calculated Israeli security objectives. Israel's worst-case scenario was having Iranian-backed Hezbollah or ISIS factions entrench themselves directly on the Golan Heights border. By providing aid to the local Syrian population and secular rebel groups, Israel created a cooperative buffer zone of civilians who had a vested interest in keeping extremists away from the fence. And again, those secular rebel groups included ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The operation successfully dismantled decades of state-sponsored anti-Israel propaganda among the local population, allegedly. In exchange for the lifeline of food and medicine, local communities provided passive security and early warnings regarding extremist movements on the border. And by extremists, what they mean is Syrian government forces who are trying to stabilize the area and get rid of the terrorists. Those are the extremists that we're talking about right now. While the IDF insisted it only provided humanitarian supplies, investigative reports by outlets like the Wall Street Journal revealed that Israel also covertly provided secret cash, fuel, and monthly stipends to specific Syrian rebel commanders to help them pay fighters and maintain control of the border. And those were those ISIS groups, and those were those Al-Qaeda groups. And they also provided weapons. And here is that Wall Street Journal report that details that. Now, in the summer of 2018, Syrian government forces heavily backed by Russian airstrikes launched a massive offensive to retake southwest Syria. As the front lines collapsed, thousands of Syrians fled directly towards the Israeli border fence, knowing that Russian and Syrian regimes wouldn't strike next to the Israeli territory. During its final weeks, the operation shifted into overdrive, distributing hundreds of tents and tons of food to the refugees trapped at the fence. In a final dramatic midnight operation, Israel worked with the Western allies to extract hundreds of white helmet civil defense rescue workers and their families, safely busing them through Israeli territory into Jordan before Syrian regime forces could capture them. Now, a little note on those white helmet civil defense workers. They actually came from an organization that was started by James Lee Mesher, and he was a British military intelligence guy. They also operated exclusively in rebel-held territory, meaning they operated within areas where ISIS also operated, and they had no trouble from ISIS or Al-Qaeda because they were working with them. And you might remember these were the people that staged that fake Syrian chemical attack from a few years ago, and they staged quite a few fake chemical attacks, actually. Well, on September 13, 2018, the IDF officially shuttered the program as Assad's forces secured the borderline. And this is a little IDF write-up about that, about them trying to convince people that they weren't actually supporting terrorists still. While the primary mandate of Operation Good Neighbor was providing humanitarian aid to Syrian civilians, the operation gained intense international controversy with the Syrian government, Russia, and various Western analysts who alleged that Israel's border strategy indirectly or directly supported extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, specifically its Syrian affiliate, Jabhat al-Nusra. You see, Israel's absolute highest priority during the Syrian civil war was preventing Iran and its powerful proxy Hezbollah from establishing permanent military front on the Golan Heights border. Because Syrian government forces had fled the border area, secular rebel groups like the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda-aligned groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, and ISIS-aligned factions became the main forces fighting Hezbollah and the Syrian regime. So they decided to help the terrorists by providing secret cash, weapons, and fuel to the local border rebels. Through the operation, Israel ensured a fighting force remained between Hezbollah and the Israeli border. One of the most controversial aspects of Israel's humanitarian border policy was its medical treatment protocols. The IDF operated on a policy of medical neutrality at that border fence. If a bleeding, critically wounded person arrived at the gate, they were treated or transferred to Israeli hospitals regardless of their ideological affiliation, except for if they were for the Syrian government. In several high-profile instances, journalists and international monitors confirmed that wounded fighters from Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, were treated inside Israeli hospitals. Once these fighters were patched up and stabilized, the IDF transported them back to the border and released them. They routinely returned directly to the Syrian battlefield to continue fighting. While Israel maintained this was purely humanitarian, critics correctly pointed out that treating wounded combatants effectively sustained Al-Qaeda's manpower on the border, and ISIS. That is because, unlike the United States, which formed a massive international coalition to aggressively hunt down and destroy ISIS and Al-Qaeda across Syria and Iraq, Israel took a passive approach towards the jihadists on its immediate border. Israel maintained a policy of tactical non-aggression with Al-Qaeda and ISIS factions, provided they did not attack Israel. This dynamic was explicitly highlighted by former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alan's admission that local ISIS affiliates apologized to Israel after an accidental clash to avoid provoking an Israeli crackdown. For years, Al-Qaeda and ISIS controlled communities right along the Israeli border fence, yet they almost never fired into Israel. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad even called the IDF the Air Force for Al-Qaeda because Israeli airstrikes in Syria exclusively targeted government and Iranian positions rather than the terrorist ISIS positions. And there was also other explicit admissions, like the Prime Minister's public admission of supporting ISIS and asking everybody what's wrong with that. More J stuff, like and follow for more.